9-year-old Amara Lee had never seen the sea. Her world was machines, white walls, and needles. One night she whispered a prayer for just one day by the waves. By dawn, the growl of motorcycles shook the street. The feared Hell's Angels stopped at her door. Everything changed that morning. Welcome to Shadows of Dignity. Before we begin, comment below where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel. Your every comment, gift, and membership helps us bring more heartfelt stories to your life. The children's ward smelled of antiseptic and quiet sadness. Amara Lee, small and fragile, lay tethered to a dialysis machine that hissed and beeped with the rhythm of her failing kidneys. At only 9, she had lived more inside hospital rooms than in playgrounds. Her arms carried tiny bruises from endless needles. Yet her smile, when it came, lit the corners of even the coldest corridors. Her mother, Rachel, stayed by her side day and night. Rachel's face showed both strength and exhaustion. The quiet bravery of a single parent trying to hold her world together. Bills piled up at home. But that wasn't the ache Rachel feared most. It was the ache of losing her daughter's laughter too soon. Amara didn't complain. Instead, she dreamed. She pressed her face against glossy magazine pages, gazing at turquoise waters and sandy shores. "Mom," she whispered one night, "what does the sea smell like?" Rachel's voice cracked as she answered, "Like freedom, sweetheart." Amara closed her eyes, whispering silently, "Just one day." That night, while machines ticked and Rachel dozed in a chair, Amara folded her tiny hands under the blanket. The prayer rose from her heart with the simple honesty only children carry. "God, just one day by the sea. Please, let me feel the waves before I can't anymore." The room held its silence. The fluorescent light buzzed. Her chest rose and fell, fragile but determined. A tear slipped across her cheek and disappeared into the pillow. Somewhere outside, far from sterile hallways and whispered prayers, engines roared. A group of leather-clad riders thundered down the highway. Their jackets bore the infamous red and white patch. Hell's Angels. Townsfolk whispered fear at their name, stories of fights, fire, and rebellion. Yet that night, their leader, Duke Lawson, rode with a strange restlessness. Something pressed against him he couldn't name. Morning would stitch together two lives that had never met. A little girl with a wish and a gang known for chaos. Their worlds were about to collide in ways no one could predict. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Willowtown, painting cracked sidewalks gold. Rachel wheeled Amara outside for a few minutes of fresh air. The girl's skin was pale, lips dry, but her eyes sparkled at the sight of birds darting through the sky. Then came the sound, at first distant, then closer, shaking the ground beneath them. Motorcycles are loud and heavy. The street seemed to tremble as nearly a dozen riders turned the corner. People froze. Shopkeepers stiffened. Mothers pulled children closer. The red and white patches flared like warnings in the sun. Hell's Angels. Rachel's heart sank. She pushed Amara's wheelchair back, toward the hospital door. But it was too late. The engine stopped right at the curb. Dust rose. Boots hit the pavement. A man stepped forward, tall and broad, his beard flecked with silver. He pulled off his helmet, his eyes falling straight on Amara. The world held its breath. Rachel tightened her grip on the chair handles. "Stay calm, baby," she whispered. The biker crouched low, his voice surprisingly soft. "Hey, sunshine, what's your name?" Rachel's heart raced. Fear pulsed through her veins. Yet Amara looked up wide-eyed, curious instead of frightened. "Amara," she said in a small but steady voice. The biker smiled, a slow, unexpected warmth. "Amara? That's beautiful." He glanced back at his crew, who stood silently, watching as though something sacred had begun. Rachel stepped forward protectively. "Please don't scare her. She's sick." The man nodded gently. "I can see that. My name's Duke. We're not here to cause trouble." His eyes flicked back to Amara. "We heard a prayer last night." Rachel froze. "What did you say?" Duke's voice lowered, almost reverent. "One of our brothers. He swears he heard a little girl's prayer on the wind, a prayer about the sea." He paused, his gaze steady. "And when we woke this morning, we just rode here." Amara's tiny mouth parted in shock. Her eyes shimmered. "The sea," she whispered, as if the word itself carried magic. For the first time, Rachel didn't know whether to fear them or believe them. Rachel's throat tightened. How could these men, these strangers with tattoos and reputations, whispered in fear, know her daughter's most secret wish? She pulled Amara's wheelchair slightly back. I don't know what you're talking about. You don't need. Duke raised a hand gently, not threatening, just steady. My mom. I know how this looks. Oh. But sometimes the world throws people together for a reason. And I think your little girl's prayer found us. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Prayer. Amara leaned forward, her small hands gripping the chair's arms. Mom, I prayed last night. I asked God to let me see the sea. Rachel froze. A chill swept through her chest. Amara's voice was clear and Dan's certain. She hadn't told anyone, not even her. Duke's crew shifted uncomfortably, big men in leather who suddenly seemed awkward, even reverent. One of them, a tattooed giant called Bear, muttered, When Duke told us this morning, I thought he was crazy. But standing here now, I'm not so sure. Rachel looked between them all, torn between disbelief and awe. These men were legends in the town's rumor mill. Dangerous, reckless, untouchable. And yet here they were.
Out!
Speaking softly to a child. Duke crouched again, meeting Amara's eyes. Want to see the ocean? Sunshine? Amara nodded slowly, her lips trembling into the smallest smile. More than anything. Rachel snapped back to herself. No, she's too fragile. She can just be dragged on the back of a motorcycle like some Duke shook his head quickly. No one's putting her in danger, I promise you that. He glanced back at his men. We can make this happen. Safe. Proper. We'll get a van, whatever it takes. But she's going to see those waves. Rachel's voice hardened. Why? Why would you care? The man's jaw tightened. His eyes clouded with memory. Because I had a sister once. She never got her wish. I buried her when she was 10. The words landed heavy, silencing even the roaring street behind them. Rachel's defenses faltered. She stared at the man, at the sincerity etched in the linesense of a weathered face. But for the first time in years, she saw something in a stranger's eyes she had almost forgotten. Genuine compassion. Amara's small hand tugged at her sleeve. Mom, please. Rachel's heart cracked. She wanted to protect her daughter and shield her from risk and Dan from disappointment. But she also wanted to give her everything, even if just for one day. Her lips trembled. She looked at Duke. If she gets sick on the way, she won't, he interrupted softly. We'll take care of her like she's our own. For a moment, the world stilled. Engines silent, passersby staring. Time is hanging by a thread. Finally, Rachel nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. One day, that's all she has. Duke stood tall, his voice steady. Then one day is enough. We ride at dawn tomorrow. That night, the hospital buzzed with whispers. Nurses peeked out windows, shocked to see rough bikers pacing the parking lot like bodyguards. Some frowned, uneasy. Others smiled, secretly rooting for the unlikely mission. Rachel sat by Amara's bed, brushing her daughter's hair back gently. Are you sure you're strong enough? She whispered. Amara smiled faintly, her eyes bright. Stronger than I've ever been. Outside, Duke lit a cigarette, staring at the stars. His men argued quietly about logistics. On vans, routes, medical supplies. The chaos of outlaws planning something utterly pure. Bear grumbled. Never thought I'd be smuggling a dialysis kid to the coast. Duke exhaled smoke, his eyes still on the sky. Never thought I'd be listening to God either. But here we are. For the first time in years, the angels weren't riding for rebellion, or fear, or fire. They were riding for a child's dream. And somewhere deep down, they all felt that this journey would change more than just Amara's life. Morning broke with the roar of engines. The hospital parking lot, usually filled with nurses' cars and delivery vans, now shook beneath the thunder of chrome and steel. The Hells Angels had arrived in full force. Rachel stood by Amara's wheelchair, her heart racing. Never in her life had she seen anything like this. Dozens of bikes lined up in rows, gleaming under the rising sun. Men with tattoos and leather vests, adjusted helmets, checked saddlebags and muttered in low voices, yet their eyes kept flicking toward Amara as if the tiny girl had become their commander. Amara's smile was wider than Rachel had seen in months. They're like knights, she whispered. Duke crouched down beside her. Better than knights? Knights wore tin cans? We ride fire. The girl giggled, a sound so pure that even Bear, the giant with the scarred face, cracked a grin. Rachel still wasn't convinced. She leaned toward Duke. How is this supposed to work? She can't sit on a motorcycle. Duke pointed to the side of the lot. There, instead of a van, was a customized trike 3 wheels, cushioned seats, a safety harness, and even a small windshield. It looked less like a biker's machine and more like a throne on wheels. We built it last night, Duke said simply. She rides in style. Rachel blinked, stunned. The outlaws had worked through the night, hammering and welding, just so her daughter could ride. Amara clapped her hands. It's beautiful. Duke's voice softened. It's yours for the day, sunshine. Rachel bit her lip, torn between gratitude and fear. But Amara's glowing face left her no room for hesitation. With trembling hands, she helped her daughter settle into the special seat. The harness clicked into place. For the first time in years, Amara looked like a child about to embark on an adventure, not a patient bound by hospital walls. Engines rumbled to life, the sound echoing across the street. Nurses came to the windows, some waving, some shaking their heads. Bystanders pulled out phones, filming the surreal sight. A terminally ill girl surrounded by an army of bikers. Duke raised his hand, signaling his crew. We ride together. No one passes the trike, she leads. The angels nodded. In their world, loyalty was law. And today, loyalty belonged to Amara. Rachel climbed into a sidecar beside her daughter, heart pounding. She clutched Amara's hand, whispering, "If this is too much, we stop, okay?" Amara's eyes shone. No stopping. I'm ready. With a roar, the convoy rolled out of the lot. Tires gripped asphalt, engines howled like thunder, and the small town watched in awe as the most feared gang in America escorted a fragile little girl toward the horizon. Highways stretched ahead, long ribbons of gray cutting through green fields. Cars pulled to the side as the bikers thundered past, a sight both terrifying and strangely noble. Drivers honked, some cheered, and one trucker even saluted. Rachel felt wind whip her hair, the rush of freedom filling her chest. For years, her life had been confined to hospitals, schedules, and silent fears. But now, with her daughter laughing beside her, it was as if the world had opened up again. Duke rode at the front, his massive frame steady, his eyes locked on the road. Every mile was a promise kept. Every turn was a vow that Amara would see the ocean. The angels surrounded the trike in perfect formation, like armored guardians. Not a single car dared cut between them. To the outside world, it looked like an outlaw parade. To Rachel, it looked like destiny. Hours passed. Amara never stopped smiling. She pointed at passing rivers, cows and fields, and even at kids who waved from back seats. For once, she wasn't a patient. She was a rider. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She whispered to herself, "Thank you, God. Thank you for this day." But even as the miles disappeared beneath them, Rachel couldn't shake one thought. This journey had only just begun, and something bigger waited at the shore. By late afternoon, the roar of the convoy had carried them across counties. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon gold. The salty temps of the ocean was already in the air, faint but growing stronger with every mile. Amara's cheeks were flushed with excitement. Her small hands gripped the sides of her custom seat, as if she were holding the reins of a wild horse. Rachel kept glancing at her, worried the long ride would exhaust her, but Amara's eyes sparkled brighter than the chrome around her. The Hells Angels remained disciplined, their formation unbroken. Cars still pulled to the shoulder as the gang passed. Some drivers raised phones to capture video. Others simply stared, caught between fear and admiration. News of their ride had already begun to spread. Posts appeared on social media, captioned with lines like "Biker gang escorts little girl to the ocean." At a gas stop, Duke signaled the group to pull over. Engines died, leaving only the hiss of cooling pipes. Rachel helped Amara sip water, expecting her to be tired. Instead, the girl looked up at Duke and whispered, "Are we close?" Duke crouched down, his leather vest creaking. "Close, sunshine. Just a little longer. You'll hear the waves soon." Amara nodded seriously, as if preparing for battle. The bear handed Rachel a sandwich, his massive hands oddly gentle. "For you? You've been holding her hand this whole way?" Eat something. Rachel hesitated, then smiled. Thank you. She caught herself staring at these men tattooed, scarred, feared by many, and realized something strange. They didn't look like criminals right now. They looked like protectors. As the convoy mounted up again, Duke's radio crackled. Another angel's voice came through. Roadblock up ahead. Cops. Rachel's stomach dropped. Of course. The police would never let a full biker gang thunder through town without trouble. Duke's jaw tightened. Turned his head slightly, scanning his crew. No one panics. We keep it calm. Don't let them touch the girl's day. Minutes later, the convoy rounded a bend and there they were, line of patrol cars, lights flashing. Officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts. Rachel's pulse quickened. What if they shut the whole thing down? What if they forced Amara back into the van, back into the life she had just escaped? The trike slowed, rumbling toward the barricade. Amara's face fell. Mom, why are they stopping us? Rachel squeezed her hand. It's okay, sweetie. Just wait. Duke pulled his bike forward, towering as he dismounted. The air was tense, like a storm about to break. One officer stepped forward, clearly the sergeant. This parade isn't authorized. You can't just block highways with motorcycles. His tone was firm, but his eyes flickered toward the trike. Duke's voice was steady. We're not blocking highways. We're escorting a child. She's terminal. Her dream is to see the ocean before it's too late. For a moment, silence hung in the air. Cops shifted uneasily. One younger officer's gaze landed on Amara, who gave a shy wave from her seat. His stern expression cracked. The sergeant exhaled slowly. You can't hold up traffic like this. Before he could finish, a horn blared. Cars waiting behind the barricade had seen the little girl and began honking in support. A few rolled down windows, cheering. Someone shouted, "Let them through." Rachel's throat tightened. For once, the crowd was on their side. The sergeant rubbed his temples. Finally, he muttered, "Fine, but you keep formation, and don't stop until you're out of town." Understood. Duke gave a single nod. Understood. Engines thundered to life again. Louder this time, almost triumphant. The convoy rolled past the patrol cars, the officers watching silently as chrome and leather roared into the distance. Rachel glanced back at them, then at Duke. She whispered, "How did you know they'd let us through?" Duke didn't look away from the road, because no one with a heart tells a dying kid she can touch the ocean. The convoy pressed on. The smell of salt grew stronger, gulls wheeled in the sky, and Amara gasped, "Mom, I hear waves." The ocean was close. The moment the first strip of blue appeared on the horizon, Amara nearly jumped out of her seat. Her little body leaned forward, her finger pointing with pure excitement. "The ocean, Mom. Look, it's really there." Rachel's eyes blurred with tears. For weeks, she had watched her daughter's body weaken, her energy drain away. Yet now, sitting in that custom trike, with hundreds of bikers roaring behind her, Amara looked alive, more alive than she had in months. The convoy crested a hill, and then the full view opened up. The Pacific stretched wide and endless, sunlight shimmering on the waves.
Else.
Ryder, can I run up the road or I'm gonna right away, I'm at a bad. Duke raised a fist in the air. Instantly, the riders echoed with horns and cheers. It was their victory cry. They had delivered her dream. As they pulled into a seaside lot, the gang carefully surrounded the trike, forming a protective circle. Locals on the boardwalk had already gathered, their phones out, stunned at the sight of the Hells Angels escorting a little girl. Some clapped, some cried openly. Bear swung off his bike first and crouched by the trike, offering Amara his arm like a knight presenting himself to a queen. "Your Majesty," he rumbled softly, "may I escort you to the shore?" Amara's face glowed. "Yes, sir." Bear. The bikers chuckled, but not one of them dared to break the spell of the moment. They followed as Amara walked slowly toward the beach, her small shoes leaving prints in the warm sand. Rachel held one hand, Bear the other, while the rest of the angels walked behind, their leather vests fluttering like banners. When the first wave rolled in, Amara let out a cry of joy. She broke free from their hands and ran forward, her toes sinking into the wet sand. Water foamed around her ankles. She squealed, laughing so hard. Rachel thought her heart might burst. "Mom, it's so cold," Amara shouted. Then she turned to Duke, who was watching silently, arms crossed, the tough leader hiding a softer storm inside. "Come on, don't just stand there." Duke blinked, as if no one had spoken to him like that in years. Slowly, he stepped forward, his heavy boots sinking in the sand, and let the tide wash over his feet. Amara grinned up at him. "See? Not so scary?" Behind them, bikers pulled out cameras. Not for themselves, but to capture her joy. Some of them had tears in their eyes. They had ridden through countless miles, faced down cops, and carried reputations of violence and fear. But this was the moment that would stay with them forever. Rachel knelt down, hugging her daughter as the surf sprayed around them. She whispered into Amara's ear, "You did it, baby. You made it." Amara, still laughing, whispered back, "This is the best day ever." For a long while, time seemed to stop. The roar of the ocean replaced the roar of motorcycles. Seagulls called overhead, children played farther down the beach, and in that circle of sand and sea, a dying girl became simply a child again, free, happy, and untouchable by sickness. When the sun began to sink, Duke quietly signaled the men to give space. They stepped back, forming a wide semicircle, standing watch like sentinels. Not one tourist dared to interrupt. The bikers' presence created a barrier stronger than any fence. Rachel looked back at them and mouthed, "Thank you." Bear cleared his throat. "We're the ones who should thank her. Reminds us what it means to live." And so they stayed until the sky burned orange and purple, until Amara's legs grew too tired to stand. Duke lifted her gently, surprising everyone with how tenderly he carried her back to the trike. For once, the feared outlaw looked like a father. The ride back from the ocean was quieter. Engines still thundered, but the energy had shifted. What had started as a promise to a little girl had become something much deeper. Amara sat, bundled in her seat, her head resting on Rachel's arm. She was exhausted, but her smile never faded. Every few minutes she would whisper, "I can still hear the waves," and Rachel would nod, holding back tears. Duke rode in silence, his jaw tight. The man who had spent years leading one of the most feared outlaw groups in America was now replaying the image of a child laughing in the surf. It cracked something inside him, something he didn't know was still there. At the halfway point, they stopped at a roadside diner. Normally the place would have locked its doors, seeing a wall of leather vests pull in. But the sight of Amara changed everything. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, rushed out. "She can't sit in here," Rachel started nervously, but the woman cut her off. "Honey, she's the guest of honor. We'll make it work." They cleared out a booth. Amara sat between Duke and Bear, tiny against their massive frames. The bikers, men who once terrified towns, now argued over who got to pour her soda or who should fetch her extra fries. When the burger came, Amara pushed her plate toward Duke. "Try some. You look hungry." The entire table froze. No one ever offered Duke food like that. Slowly, with the faintest of smiles, he picked up a fry. "Don't mind if I do." The men laughed, but quietly. They knew something had changed. As they ate, locals filtered in. A young boy with a toy motorcycle clutched his mom's leg, staring wide-eyed at the gang. Amara waved him over. At first, his mother shook her head. But when Duke gave a slight nod, the boy shuffled forward. "This is Sir Bear," Amara introduced, pointing to the giant biker with tattoos across his neck. "He's very scary, but he's actually nice." Bear pretended to growl, then pulled a coin from behind the boy's ear. The kid squealed. The entire diner laughed. Rachel sat back, watching the surreal scene. For the first time in months, she wasn't thinking about hospitals, test results, or time running out. She was watching her daughter live. When the convoy finally hit the road again, the night had fallen. Headlights stretched for miles, a ribbon of light moving through the darkness. Amara leaned back and whispered, "It feels like we're flying." Rachel kissed the top of her head. "That's because you've got angels with you, sweetheart. No one corrected her. Not one biker laughed. By the time they reached home, neighbors had gathered, drawn by the sound of the motorcycles. They watched as Duke himself lifted Amara from the trike and carried her gently to her front porch. Rachel followed, her hands trembling, not from fear but gratitude. Before setting Amara down, Duke bent close and said something only she could hear. "Hey." She giggled and nodded, then hugged his neck tight. The sight nearly broke Rachel. The bikers stood waiting, engines idled. Leather vests gleamed under the streetlights. These were men who lived by their own code, who didn't bow to society's rules. Yet here they were, saluting a child like she was royalty. Rachel's voice cracked as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Duke's eyes softened. "You already did. You let us be part of her world." One by one, the bikes roared back to life. The street shook with thunder as the Hells Angels pulled away, their silhouettes swallowed by the night. But Rachel knew this wasn't the end. Something had been set in motion. And as she carried Amara inside, she realized this story had only just begun. The next morning, Rachel expected everything to go back to normal. The machines humming in Amara's room, the calendar reminders for doctor's visits, and the constant weight pressing on her chest. But instead, her doorbell rang at sunrise. When she opened it, Duke was standing there with Bear and two other riders. Behind them, parked neatly along the curb, were three brand new bicycles, shiny, chrome polished, with pink ribbons tied to the handlebars. Amara came running out in her pajamas, eyes wide. "Are those for me?" Duke crossed his arms. "Nope, they're for your whole army. Every princess needs her knights." Rachel blinked. Army. Right then, three neighborhood kids peeked out from across the street. Normally, they kept their distance from Amara, not out of cruelty, but because they didn't know how to treat someone who was always sick. But when they saw the bikes, and Duke motioned them over, hesitation vanished. Within minutes, Amara was leading a bike parade down the block. Duke walked alongside her, one massive hand on the seat to steady her. Bear followed behind, pretending to be a royal guard. Rachel stood on the porch, watching her daughter laugh louder than she had in months. Word spread fast. By afternoon, more bikers arrived. Some brought stuffed animals, others brought food. One even showed up with a puppy that made Amara squeal with joy. Rachel tried to protest. "This is too much." But Duke silenced her with a look. "She's family now," he said simply. Neighbors who once crossed the street when the gang rode through now came forward. They shook hands, offered thanks, and even shared stories. For the first time, Rachel saw the walls between fear and understanding crumble. That night, Rachel sat at the kitchen table while Amara fell asleep with the puppy curled against her. Duke lingered by the door. "You don't have to keep doing this," Rachel whispered. He tilted his head. "Doing what? Showing up? Giving her things? Turning our lives upside down?" Duke studied her for a long moment. His voice dropped low. "Lady, if you think this is about gifts, you don't understand. That little girl. She gave us something we didn't even know we'd lost." Rachel swallowed. "And what's that hope?" The word hit her harder than she expected. Over the next week, the angels returned again and again. They escorted Amara to school on their bikes, lined up like a wall of thunder. Teachers and students peeked through windows as the most feared outlaw group in the state became a little girl's bodyguards. At recess, Amara stood taller. No longer the sick kid everyone whispered about, but the girl who had an army at her back. Her classmates didn't pity her anymore. They admired her. One afternoon, as Rachel walked her home, Amara tugged her sleeve. "Mom, do you think they'll still be here, you know?" Later. Rachel hesitated. She knew what her daughter meant. Later, when the illness might win, later when all that remained would be memories, Rachel knelt and brushed a curl from Amara's face. "Sweetheart, I think they'll always be here, even if we can't see them." From across the street, Duke watched. He didn't step in. He didn't need to. His promise was already written in the way he stood guard, the way the angels lingered even when no one asked them to. What Rachel didn't know yet was that their story was about to reach beyond their quiet street, because soon the world would hear about the girl who captured the hearts of the Hells Angels. 2 weeks later, Rachel's phone buzzed nonstop. At first, she thought it was just more appointment reminders, but when she glanced at the screen, she froze. Her social media was blowing up. A video shaky, clearly filmed on a cell phone, showed Amara riding her bike. Duke steadying her and the rest of the angels trailing like loyal knights. Someone had uploaded it with the caption, "The toughest bikers in town protect the bravest little girl." By morning, the clip had millions of views. News vans began showing up outside their house. Reporters leaned over fences, begging for interviews. Rachel panicked. She didn't want Amara exposed to the chaos, but it was too late. The world had already fallen in love with the story. When Rachel opened the door one morning, Duke stood there, holding a folded newspaper. The front page showed Amara grinning wide on her bike, surrounded by leather-clad giants. The headline read, "Hell's Angels become guardian angels." Rachel's voice cracked. This is going too far. But Duke shook his head. No, this is just the beginning. Soon, letters started arriving. Piles of them. Cards from strangers across the country, hand-drawn pictures from kids. Even donations slipped into envelopes enough to cover medical bills that had been choking Rachel for years. Rachel sat on the living room floor one night, surrounded by envelopes. Tears spilled onto her hands. She wasn't used to kindness this big, this overwhelming. Amara, wearing her princess crown, plopped beside her. "Mom, we're famous." Rachel laughed through her tears. "You are, sweetheart, you really are." But not everyone saw it as a miracle. One evening, a stern man in a suit knocked at the door, introduced himself as a local official. The smile was thin and rehearsed. "We can't allow a criminal organization to parade around like this," he said. "It sends the wrong message." Duke, who had been leaning against his bike in the driveway, stepped forward. "You got a problem with us helping a sick kid?" The official's face paled, but he pressed on. "Public image matters. The city can't be associated with people like you." Rachel's anger, bottled up for weeks, exploded. People like them. "Do you mean the ones paying for my daughter's medicine? The ones making her smile when doctors couldn't? If that's the wrong message, then maybe this city needs to hear it louder." The official left quickly, but Rachel noticed cameras catching every word. By the next day, her outburst was viral. For once, the public wasn't siding with authority. They were siding with Amara and with the angels.
Oh.
Soon after, a hospital called. They had seen the coverage, and thanks to the flood of donations, they could finally approve Amara for a cutting-edge treatment trial. A chance at more time, maybe even recovery. Rachel hung up the phone in disbelief, then turned to Duke. Her voice trembled. This is because of you." But Duke just shook his head. "No, this is because of her." That night, the angels roared down Main Street, not as outlaws but as heroes. As crowds lined the sidewalks cheering for Amara, holding up signs that read "Ride for Hope." And for the first time in years, Rachel didn't feel alone. She felt unstoppable. Because somehow, against all odds, her daughter's fight had become everyone's fight. The hospital wing smelled of antiseptic and cold air. Machines beeped steadily, their rhythms a constant reminder of what was at stake. Amara sat in the oversized recliner chair, tiny compared to the wires and tubes around her. Yet she looked fearless, wearing her sparkly crown and clutching the stuffed bear Duke had won for her at a carnival. Rachel sat beside her, her hands clasped so tightly they ached.
Aye.
Every time the nurse checked Amara's vitals, Rachel held her breath. Duke paced the room like a caged lion. He was used to this kind of battle, the kind you couldn't win with fists or thunderous engines. The angels had parked their bikes outside, engines silent but presence undeniable. The hospital staff whispered nervously at first, but soon realized those men weren't there to cause trouble. They were there to stand guard. The treatment began with a soft hiss of medication flowing into Amara's arm. Rachel leaned close. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just close your eyes. Pretend you're flying." Amara whispered, flying like the angels. Rachel's chest tightened. She glanced at Duke, who froze mid-step, his throat working as if he couldn't swallow the lump forming there. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Doctors murmured about numbers, charts, and responses. Rachel barely heard them.
Ow.
All she saw was her little girl, fighting, breathing, refusing to let go. At one point, Amara stirred, her eyelids fluttering. "Mom?" she whispered. Rachel leaned in quickly. "I'm here, baby." Amara's lips curled into a faint smile. "When I get better, can we ride to the beach? I want to feel the wind again." Rachel broke down, nodding furiously. "Yes. 100 times, yes." Duke stepped closer, his rough hand resting gently on Amara's blanket. His voice, low and gravelly, carried a weight Rachel had never heard before. "You'll ride with us, princess. Front of the pack. Nothing will stop you." For the first time since the treatment started, Rachel saw the faintest glow returning to Amara's cheeks. Not yet, but it was hope. But it was hope. Real, tangible hope. Later that evening, when Amara finally drifted into a steady sleep, Rachel slipped out into the hallway. Duke followed silently. She turned to him, her voice breaking. "Can't do this without you." Duke shook his head. "You already have. Every day. I just showed up late." Rachel's tears spilled over, but she smiled through them. "You're here now. That's what matters." Outside, the angels still stood guard. Some leaned on their bikes, others smoked quietly, but all of them had the same unspoken mission: protect this little girl like she was their own. At that night, for the first time in months, Rachel didn't dream of hospitals or bills or funerals. She dreamed of waves crashing against the shore, of her daughter's laughter mixing with the roar of engines, and of a ride that never ended. Because maybe, just maybe, that dream was about to become real. The next morning, the hospital seemed quieter than usual. Nurses whispered among themselves and doctors paused mid-step, glancing at the bikes parked outside. Duke and his crew had stayed overnight, taking turns keeping watch. The hum of engines and the smell of leather filled the hallways, but somehow it felt peaceful. Amara woke slowly, her eyes fluttering open as sunlight streamed through the window. She saw Duke kneeling by her bed, holding a small jar of sand and a seashell. "From your beach," he said softly. Her tiny hands reached for them, and a smile spread across her pale face. Rachel sat beside her, brushing stray hair from Amara's forehead, tears glistening in her eyes. For the first time in weeks, Amara's laughter echoed in the ward. It was quiet at first, a gentle giggle that grew louder as Duke, Tank, and Rex began telling stories from the ride. Even the doctors paused, some shaking their heads in disbelief. These were the notorious Hell's Angels, known for chaos and fear, yet here they were soft, careful, and full of tenderness. The day was spent in small, precious moments. Duke lifted Amara onto a chair by the window so she could feel the breeze, and Tank handed her a small toy dolphin. Each gesture, no matter how simple, seemed monumental in Amara's eyes. Rachel watched, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and awe. Her daughter, so fragile, was surrounded by people who had become a protective family in a single day. As afternoon approached, the hospital staff began to relax. Some even joined in, helping to set up small chairs for the bikers or bringing extra blankets for Amara. The mood shifted completely. What had started as fear had transformed into quiet reverence. People could see that kindness could emerge from the most unexpected places. Hours later, Amara's energy began to wane. Her small body trembled with fatigue. Rachel held her close, whispering soothing words. "We'll rest soon, baby. Just a little longer." Duke knelt beside them, his eyes soft but steady. "You've done more today than most people do in a lifetime, sunshine. Rest now. We'll be right here." Amara's eyelids drooped, her breathing slowing as she held the seashell to her chest. The angels stood silently around the room, forming a protective circle. The sound of the sea seemed to echo faintly in the walls, carried by the memories of their ride. When night fell, the angels quietly mounted their bikes, preparing to leave. Duke lingered, placing a gentle hand on Rachel's shoulder. "She'll always have this day. And we'll always remember her too." Rachel nodded, tears flowing freely. "Thank you, all of you, for everything." And in that moment, the hospital felt different. Fear and dread had been replaced by hope, courage, and an unspoken promise. That even in the darkest places, moments of freedom and joy could still exist. Amara drifted into sleep, clutching the seashell and dolphin close to her heart. Her dreams filled with waves, wind, and endless skies. Outside, the town whispered about what had happened. People had expected chaos, but instead witnessed a miracle of grace, courage, and humanity. And somewhere in the distance, the sound of engines faded into the night, leaving behind the memory of a little girl who had touched the hearts of outlaws and reminded the world that love could come from the most unexpected places. The following days were quieter. Mara's strength gradually waned, her body tethered once more to machines. Yet her spirit seemed lighter, as though the sea itself had breathed courage into her fragile frame. She no longer spoke of what she couldn't do, only of what she had seen, Rachel stayed by her side constantly, reading stories of mermaids, ocean voyages, and distant shores. Amara would close her eyes and whisper, "I was there, Mom. I was really there." Weeks passed and eventually Amara drifted into eternal sleep. It was peaceful, not fearful. Her tiny hands still clutched the seashell Duke had given her, a reminder of the day her dream had been fulfilled. Rachel wept, but her grief was tempered with gratitude. Her daughter had known freedom, had touched the ocean, and had felt joy in ways she had never imagined possible. On the day of her farewell, the Hell's Angels returned. Engines rumbled like drums of honor as they escorted Amara's small casket to the cemetery. Leather vests glinted in the sun, but there was no swagger, no intimidation, only reverence. The townspeople, who once feared these outlaws, now watched in awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Hardened men carrying the memory of a fragile child's dream with solemn respect. Rachel followed behind, her grief heavy, but her heart grateful. When her eyes met Duke's, she mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded, his eyes damp, understanding the depth of her loss and her gratitude. Every biker present felt the weight of the moment, their hearts cracked open by the innocence and courage of one small girl. Later, at the shoreline, the angels gathered one last time. Duke lifted Amara's seashell high and threw it into the waves. The ocean seemed to roar in response, carrying her name forever in its song. Each wave whispered back the memory of her prayer, a reminder that even the smallest voice can make the world listen. Rachel stood quietly, watching the horizon, feeling both sorrow and solace. The place where fear once lived now held grace and memory. The sea, the angels, and the little girl's courage had left an imprint on every heart present. Duke, Tank, Rex, and the others lingered a moment longer, then mounted their bikes. Engines rumbled to life, fading slowly into the distance, leaving behind a silence filled with respect, reverence, and the echo of a miracle. In the days that followed, Rachel often sat by Amara's bedside, holding the seashell, smiling through tears. She told stories of the waves of the angels on bikes who had become family, and of the little girl who had taught them all about courage, freedom, and love. "Bless you," she whispered, "your dream lives on, my sunshine, always."
Ace.
And somewhere carried by the tides and the wind, the memory of Amara Lee lived on. Her whispered prayer, answered by the kindness of strangers and the power of grace, reminded everyone who heard it that life is not measured in years, but in moments of love, freedom, and hope. Amara's story became a quiet legend in Willowtown, a tale of a fragile child who touched hearts, of outlaws softened by innocence, and of a single day by the sea that changed lives forever. The following days were quieter. Amara's strength gradually waned, her body tethered once more to machines. Yet her spirit seemed lighter, as though the sea itself had breathed courage into her fragile frame. She no longer spoke of what she couldn't do, only of what she had seen. Rachel stayed by her side constantly, reading stories of mermaids, ocean voyages, and distant shores. Amara would close her eyes and whisper, "I was there, Mom. I was really there." Weeks passed and eventually Amara drifted into eternal sleep. It was peaceful, not fearful. Her tiny hands still clutched the seashell Duke had given her, a reminder of the day her dream had been fulfilled. Rachel wept, but her grief was tempered with gratitude. Her daughter had known freedom, had touched the ocean, and had felt joy in ways she had never imagined possible. On the day of her farewell, the Hell's Angels returned. Engines rumbled like drums of honor as they escorted Amara's small casket to the cemetery. Leather vests glinted in the sun, but there was no swagger, no intimidation, only reverence. The townspeople, who once feared these outlaws, now watched in awe. They had witnessed something extraordinary. Hardened men carrying the memory of a fragile child's dream with solemn respect. Rachel followed behind, her grief heavy, but her heart grateful. When her eyes met Duke's, she mouthed a silent thank you. He nodded, his eyes damp, understanding the depth of her loss and her gratitude. Every biker present felt the weight of the moment, their hearts cracked open by the innocence and courage of one small girl. Later, at the shoreline, the angels gathered one last time. Duke lifted Amara's seashell high and threw it into the waves. The ocean seemed to roar in response, carrying her name forever in its song. Each wave whispered back the memory of her prayer, a reminder that even the smallest voice can make the world listen. Rachel stood quietly, watching the horizon, feeling both sorrow and solace. The place where fear once lived now held grace and memory. The sea, the angels, and the little girl's courage had left an imprint on every heart present. Duke, Tank, Rex, and the others lingered a moment longer, then mounted their bikes. Engines rumbled to life, fading slowly into the distance, leaving behind a silence filled with respect, reverence, and the echo of a miracle. In the days that followed, Rachel often sat by Amara's bedside, holding the seashell, smiling through tears. She told stories of the waves of the angels on bikes who had become family, and of the little girl who had taught them all about courage, freedom, and love. "Bless you," she whispered, "your dream lives on, my sunshine, always." And somewhere carried by the tides and the wind, the memory of Amara Lee lived on. Her whispered prayer, answered by the kindness of strangers and the power of grace, reminded everyone who heard it that life is not measured in years, but in moments of love, freedom, and hope. Amara's story became a quiet legend in Willowtown, a tale of a fragile child who touched hearts, of outlaws softened by innocence, and of a single day by the sea that changed lives forever.